What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Stamina Sorcerer. So Stamina Sorcerer got a few changes with its tool sets here in Murkmire, some of which might affect our rotation a little bit here, and we'll talk about some of the changes there. But generally speaking, Stamina Sorcerers are going to be on the lower half when it comes to the classes and how they line up DPS wise. Generally speaking, Wardens, Nightblades, and DKs are going to be a little bit stronger than Stam Sorcs. Stam Sorcs are pulling pretty toe-to-toe with DKs, but DKs are kind of inching out just a bit ahead if you have something like Morag Tong in the group. If you don't have Morag Tong, they're actually pretty close to each other. So only the Stamplar is the one that's going to be just a hair lower than Stam Sorcs. But generally speaking, the gap between all the stamina classes have shrunken by a fair margin over the past few patches. So really, even though Wardens and Nightblades do pull out a little bit of head, Stam Sorcs are still pretty strong, and they actually offer one of the greatest cleave damage in the game right now compared to other classes. The only class that comes close to matching Stam Sorcs with their cleave damage is going to be Wardens. So that's a nice thing for Stam Sorcs. The really big downside of Stam Sorcs, though, is the fact that they don't really provide any sort of group utility at all compared to some other classes. So that's kind of the only downside of Stam Sorc. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, our attributes, skills, everything you need to know in order to recreate this build yourself. We'll talk a little bit about gear, different gear substitutions you can make if you don't have access to certain expansions or DLCs. And then we'll talk about a rotation. It has changed a little bit from Somerset and Wolf Hunter into Murkmire, so we will be talking about that, and then we'll do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get a comparison as to where the Stam Sorc stands compared to some other stamina DPS classes. So starting off first here, we'll start with our gear. So for our monster helm, we're still going to be going with Stormfist. So Sorcs do have an additional, basically what's called an execute, more or less, under their storm calling skill tree here. It's called implosion. So whenever you deal shock damage, you have 6% chance to basically deal some additional damage to any enemy under 15% health, and it also does the same thing with physical damage. So Stormfist fits that build pretty nicely, dealing both shock and physical damage, so that just gives us a little bit more chance to proc that execute implosion. Now, implosion itself doesn't add that much DPS, but it is helpful to have that little bit of additional execute, especially because Stam Sorcs don't have a natural spammable execute. So it just helps boost your DPS a little bit during execute there. Stormfist is a pretty easy set to get. You get it from Vet's Tempest Island, which is a base game dungeon, so anybody's able to grab this set. However, there are a few other options that you could potentially use. So the big downside of running Stormfist is the fact that it only procs on the boss, and if the boss moves out of that Stormfist proc, you basically have wasted your proc. So there are a few other options that kind of carry that weakness a little bit or help mitigate that weakness a little bit. So the first one is going to be Veladreth. Veladreth, you get this from Cradle of Shadow, so you will need to have access to the Shadows of the Hist DLC in order to complete the dungeon here. So Veladreth doesn't have that same disadvantage of Stormfist in that if the boss is mobile, you can still actually hit it with Veladreth because there's 3 disease spores that pop out. So a good raider might be able to aim their character so that one of the disease spores does manage to hit the boss. But again, you still have to aim it, so it's not going to be consistent, but it is going to be a little bit better than Stormfist when it comes to more mobile bosses. Another option is going to be Selene's. Selene's the base game set. You get this from Selene's Web, and it's very similar to Stormfist. So the difference between Stormfist and Selene's is Selene's have that additional max stamina versus the stamina regen that you get from Stormfist. Selene's can also proc implosion, and the downside is it only procs off of melee damage, which is Stormfist, which procs off of any damage. So generally speaking, Selene's and Stormfist do pull pretty toe-to-toe, especially when you consider that one-piece bonus there. So you can really choose whichever helm you decide to get. But Veladreth is going to be a little bit better for those more mobile fights just because of the fact that you have those 3 spores. In addition, with Veladreth, if you have a boss with a very large hitbox, you can get multiple spores to pop on the boss at the same time. So you can get some extra damage that way using Veladreths. So for stamina sets and for DPS sets in general, you basically split up your sets into what's called a body set and a front bar set. So your body set is a set that's active all the time, no matter which bar you are on. Basically, it's worn on the body, so it's either going to be armor pieces or jewelry pieces. So those sets are typically going to be sets where the 5-piece set is static, or you don't want that 5-piece to drop at all while you're swapping bars. So Relequen here is going to be the strongest body set you can get in the game right now for stamina DPS. You do need to have the Somerset expansion in order to get Relequens because it does drop from the Cloud Rest trial. I have the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version. The difference there is going to be that additional max stamina bonus on that 5-piece effect. The DPS difference between the two is pretty small. We're talking probably around 1 to 1.5% DPS difference, so pick whichever one you'd like. The most important thing is you can't mix and match the two sets, so you basically need to have 5 imperfect or 5 perfect armor pieces or body pieces in order to get that 5-piece bonus. You can't combine the two sets together. They are considered 2 separate sets. So other body sets that you might want to consider running are basically anything with a static bonus. So a good example of something that you might want to consider as a static set is going to be, if I can pull it out real quick, give me something like Leviathan, because the 5-piece set is a static effect, so it adds weapon crit, but if you have it as a front bar set and you swap to your back bar, you'll lose that weapon crit while you're on your back bar. So this is an example of a set that you want to run as your body set. So Leviathan's one option. Strength of the Automaton is also not a bad option either, because a lot of our damage is physical damage, so it basically acts like a little bit of a stronger version of Hunding's Rage. So Hunding's is again another body set you can wear. All 3 of these sets are in the base game, so you don't have to worry about having any sort of DLC or expansion in order to grab these sets here. Automatons from Darkshade, Leviathans from Crypt of Hearts, and Hunding's is a craftable set. So those are kind of your main sets that you can get that are from dungeons. So those are really... Oh, there's also one more body set that I do want to mention here. It's going to be Vicious Serpent. This is a base game set. You can get this from any of the Craglorn trials. It's also known as Vicious Ophidian, so don't be confused if you see Vicious Ophidian drop. That's the Vicious Serpent set. This is a good body set here, mainly because that 5-piece reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 8%, so that is a static effect, so you do want to active on both bars. Really helps out your sustain there, and it also continues to provide Minor Slayer, so that's a pretty nice buff to have there. The other 3 sets that I mentioned earlier do not have Minor Slayer, so generally speaking, Vicious Ophidian is going to be a little bit ahead of those 3 sets there, just because of that Minor Slayer bonus. Those other 3 sets, though, are pretty good options there if you haven't had the time yet to farm Vicious Ophidian from the Craglorn trials. Moving on ahead to our front bar sets. So the front bar set, as you can imagine from the name, is only active on your front bar, so it's not active on your back bar. So these sets are typically going to be what are called proc sets. So these are sets that have a proc effect as the 5-piece, and that proc effect carries over to your back bar, even though the set itself is not active on the back bar. So in this example here, we have Veiled Heritance. This is the set that I'm running right now. So when you deal damage, you have 10% chance to increase your weapon damage by 400 for 5 seconds. So because this is a proc set, it will carry over to our back bar when we bar swap, and we're able to maintain that weapon damage bonus there until it runs out, in which case hopefully we'll be back on our front bar and we can reproc it that way. So there are a lot of different front bar sets you can run as a Stamsorc, and all of them are pretty close together. So I'm running Veiled Heritance here just because it's a pretty easy set to get. This is a heavy armor set that's just dropped from Auradon, so it is a base game set. You will need to use jewelry and weapons because it is heavy armor, so you won't be able to necessarily wear it on your body at all. And then you will have to transmute all of your jewelry pieces because they come in healthy, so you will have to transmute them into, in this case, Bloodthirty or Infused. Either jewelry trait is perfectly fine. So 3 Bloodthirty is going to be the strongest, but it is going to be dependent a little bit on how long you're going to execute, how many people have Bloodthirsties in group, and things like that. So you can go with Bloodthirty, Infused, or any combination thereof. And then we have weapon damage enchants on our jewelry. For our armor, it's all divines with 1 health enchant on a small piece, and then stamina enchants on the rest of our pieces here. And we do have 1 heavy piece here. I do like to have that 1 heavy piece for some additional health here, so that's up to you. You can go 7 medium if you would like, but I just like to have that additional health bonus there. For our weapons, double infused with the poison damage and an absorb stamina enchant. It doesn't matter what hand it goes on because they are both infused. Generally speaking, I like to have poison on my main hand and then absorb stamina on my offhand like this. That's just a personal preference thing. You don't have to do this. If you are running a different trait though, generally speaking, you do want that absorb stamina on your offhand. So I would still recommend sticking with poison main, absorbs off, just in case you don't have double infused if you're running something like Nern Infused instead, or Nern or Infused Precise or something like that. Then for our back bar, we have an Infused Maelstrom Bow with the weapon damage enchant. Endless Hail does proc our weapon damage enchant now, so it's pretty easy to get almost 100% uptime on that enchant, so that's why we have it on our back bar here. Now, in terms of other front bar sets that you can run, first set I'm going to mention here is going to be Berserking Warrior. This is actually going to be pretty close to, if not beat out, all the other sets in the game, but it does depend a little bit on how well you're able to maintain minor and major force in your group itself. So this is a heavy armor set that is dropped from Helra Citadel, so you will have to farm it, and just like with Veiled Heritance, because this is a heavy armor set, you will have to go 3 jewelry and 2 weapons, and you will have to transmute all 3 of your jewelry pieces. So that's kind of the downside of running Berserking Warrior. The other thing too is that it's a little bit more difficult for a Stamsort to maintain the full stacks just because of the nature of our back bar rotation. We will have 4 global cooldowns on our back bar rotation if we don't use our ultimate. If we use our ultimate, it's 5 global cooldowns, so it's really hard to maintain anything above 80% uptime on Berserking Warrior. You can certainly do so, you can certainly get very good uptimes on Berserking Warrior, but it's just a little bit more difficult on a Stamsort compared to some other classes. Other sets here, let me see if I can find them all here. So the first set I want to talk about here is going to be Briarheart. So Briarheart is a drop set from Hrothgar. It's a medium armor set, so you can go in with body or jewelry or weapons. You will want to have weapons though, because it is a proc set, so you do want to have it as your front bar set primarily. So because this is a drop set from an overland zone, you can buy this off of guild traders. You don't need to have Hrothgar in order to actually use it. You can just buy it off of a guild trader and use it perfectly fine here. So when you look at the 5-piece effect, it's a 10-second proc duration with a 15-second cooldown, and when you take into consideration the amount of weapon damage you're getting, it basically works out to be basically a Hunting's Rage in terms of an effective weapon damage boost on the 5-piece, but you get additional heal applied to it, so it's a nice secondary effect on top of that additional damage you get from Briarheart. And then there's, I believe, one more set here that I want to talk about, and that's going to be Ravager. I don't believe I have it here. But Ravager is another set that you could run. It is a PvP set, again, very similar to Berserking Warrior and Ravager or Veiled Heritance. It is a heavy armor set, so you will need to go jewelry weapons. Because it's a PvP set, you can buy it off of guild traders, or you can farm it yourself. You just have to go to Vlistarius when your alliance controls it and buy the boxes there, and hopefully get lucky with jewelry and double daggers. Ravager is going to be a little bit more difficult to maintain good uptimes just because Relequen no longer procs Ravager, but it is still not a bad set to pick up because our primary spammable here, Shrouded Dagger, is considered a melee attack, so you do have some additional chances to proc, but it has gone down compared to in Wolf Hunter. The average proc that I was getting on Ravager was probably around 50% or so, so definitely a hit on uptime there. So in terms of what I like to use Veiled Heritance, but Berserking Warrior is a very strong choice if you have very good major force uptime in your group. Now going over our character sheet, we are Red Guard. Red Guards are still the strongest race when it comes to stamina DPS, and that's primarily because of that Adrenaline Rush passive, which helps restore stamina. We do like that additional sustain there. We still also get 9% stam regen, 10% max stamina, so definitely want to be a Red Guard if you can. There are some other options though if you don't want to play a Red Guard. Khajiits are a good second option here. They don't get any additional max stamina, so you will have lower resources overall, but you do get 8% additional crit, so your crit's going to be higher, which might make Berserking Warrior a little bit stronger just because of the way crit modifiers work that way in the game. But like I mentioned earlier, you don't get any additional max stamina bonus, and you only get 21% magic stamina regen, so you do lose out on the sustain a little bit. Wood Elves, the Bosmer, are another racial option. They get 6% max stamina and 10% stamina regen, so they're basically kind of sitting somewhere, basically a weaker version of the Red Guard with a little bit worse sustain overall and worse max resources. But if you want to play a Bosmer, by all means, you can definitely go that route. And finally, for those of you guys who have access to the Imperial race, Imperials are not a bad choice either. 12% max health, 10% max stamina, so you don't have to worry about putting any points into health like I have here, because that racial passive will put you up to a respectable amount of health without having to invest into health at all. So Imperials are a nice option, but very similar to the other races, the Bosmer, the Khajiits, you do lose out on sustain, so that's kind of the downside of running an Imperial. For our attributes, 60 into stamina, 4 into health here. That's just to help us get to 16k health. I recommend hitting about 16k health for vet trials and things like that. It's nice to have the additional survivability built in. If you want some more survivability, by all means, you can put some more points into health. I personally would not put any more points into health once you hit 10. At that point, you're kind of giving up a little bit too much when it comes to max resources. So you're going to be sacrificing a little bit too much DPS, in my opinion, if you put more than 10 points into health that way. So one other thing I want to mention, if you do decide to run Ravager, Ravager does have a health bonus as one of its armor set effects. So in that case, you can put all your points into stamina if you would like, and you don't have to run a health enchant either. So our 16k health does come from our 4 points into health, our 1 heavy piece, as well as our health enchant on that small piece there. For Mundus, we're going with the Lover because of the changes to Night Mother's Gaze and Sunderflame that was made several patches ago. It's a little bit harder for us to get up the penetration cap without running the Lover, so pretty much all stamina DPS are running the Lover because even with all the other debuffs in the game active, so Alkosh, Storm Infused Crusher, Major Minor Fracture, we still can't get the penetration cap without running the Lover. So pretty much your only option here is the Lover. For food, we have our Tam Takeaway Broth. This is a fairly expensive food to get because the ingredients used to make it are still relatively rare. So don't feel like you have to use our Tam Takeaway Broth. This is basically a slightly upgraded version of Dubious Camoran Throne. So just use Dubious if you can't afford our Tam Takeaway Broth. That's a perfectly fine alternative here. Stam Sorks cannot, at least in my experience, they cannot sustain a full light attack rotation even with very good orb support. So generally speaking, I will not recommend running blue food, but if you want to put a couple of heavy attacks into your rotation and just run blue food for the additional health and stamina, by all means you can do so, but just be aware you will have to definitely do a heavy attack here and there in your rotation that way. Now going over our skills for our front bar here, we have Rending Slashes, Shrouded Dagger, Dark Deal, Hurricane, Bound Armaments, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. Now, in terms of Shrouded Daggers, this is our main spammable that's available to everybody in the game right now. You can also replace this if you have access to the Psijic skill line. You can replace this with, not Elemental Weapon, but the other more Crushing Weapon instead. So that's another option there for spammable. But I like Shrouded Dagger because it gives it a little bit of additional cleave on your attack there. So I prefer Shrouded Dagger over Crushing Weapon. For our back bar, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Rearming Trap, Bound Armaments again, and then we have Greater Storm Atronach. You can go Greater Storm Atronach or you can go with Ballista. Both of them will proc Implosion, but the Greater Storm Atronach does provide Major Berserk to one person in your group, so it does provide some additional utility there. Plus you get some health while it is out because of your Daedric summoning passive here. I believe it is Daedric Protector. Not Daedric Protector, Expert Summoner, so it's nice to have the additional health even if it's not active the entire time, but it's that Major Berserk that really puts Greater Storm Atronach as a stronger ultimate to use. Now for our CP, the cap is now 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of the 3 different constellation colors. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Mooncalf, 75 into Nasty. That gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes however you'd like. So I like to have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord, but you can place them however you'd like. You can even push to Nasty and Mooncalf to that last percentage point, get 100 points into both of them, and give you 70 points to work with afterwards. For our blue CPs, we will be assuming that you're running with a group that has Alkosh and is running Infused Crusher, at least an Infused Crusher, as well as having a Stampline group to apply Minor Fracture. So that's where our Piercing comes in. It will help offset a little bit of downtime in Alkosh because it's very difficult to get 100% uptime in Alkosh unless you're a very, very experienced tank in a very, very good group, well-optimized group. So that's just something to keep in mind here. If you do need to put a couple more points into Piercing because you don't have good uptime on Alkosh or something, you can drop Precise Strike to 61, Thaumaturge to 61, Mastered Arms down to 40, and that'll give you 18 more points to put into Piercing that way. You shouldn't need any more points than that, but if you absolutely must, then you can drop Mighty down to 56. So in an optimized group, 64 Mighty, 26 Piercing, 66 Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge, and then 40 into Mastered Arms. And for our red CPs, this is a generic approach here, so it'll give you very good mitigation across all the pieces of content in the game. But if you want to maximize mitigation for any single piece of content, you will need to redistribute your red CPs accordingly. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that's pretty much all of our build information. Now we can go ahead and talk about our rotation. So like I mentioned earlier, the rotation did change a little bit, mainly because of the changes to Dark Deal. So Dark Deal in Wolf Hunter basically returned a lump sum of resources when you cast it. Now it returns a lump sum, and then also returns some additional stamina over 20 seconds after you cast it. So this basically gives us a little bit of additional regen, so you get that, in this case we get 3600 stamina right away, plus we get an additional 2400 over 20 seconds, so that basically works out to be an additional 120 flat regen. So we don't have to cast Dark Deal as often anymore, but we still need to cast it every 20 seconds in order to maintain our regen that way. So that does change our rotation a little bit here. So we can put Dark Deal on the front bar here, like I have here, or you can swap where it is with the Rearming Trap and put it on the back bar. It's kind of up to you where you want to put it. There's not really that much of DPS difference overall. So you will basically get a little bit more if you have Rearming Trap on your front bar here versus on your Dark Deal on your back bar. But if you are going to be running something like Berserking Warrior, you kind of want to minimize the time you have on your back bar. Really, any proc set on the that you're running on your front bar here. If you run Dark Deal, because it has a cast time of 1.2 seconds, it basically acts as 2 global cooldowns. So it does increase the time you're on your back bar, which does decrease the time you have on your front bar, which ultimately ends up decreasing the amount of uptime on something like Berserking Warrior or Veiled Heritance or even Ravager. So I personally prefer to move Dark Deal to the front bar here now that you know, that's taken into consideration now, so that way we basically minimize this. Instead of 5, we have 4 global cooldowns instead, or I should say 4 to 5 compared to 5 to 6 if we had Dark Deal on our back bar. DPS difference, like I said, is going to be pretty minimal overall. Now, for our rotation itself, pretty straightforward. It's pretty much keeping track of dots. So the main dot that's going to be a little bit weird is going to be Hurricane, because it's 15-second duration. The rest of our dots line up fairly decently well. So back bar rotation is pretty straightforward. You just do Trap, Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection, go your front bar, then Rending Slashes, Dark Deal if it's isn't active, and then Hurricane, and then you just use Shrouded Dagger as your spam bowl here. So here's kind of an example. So we use Dark Deal, and now we have a 20-second timer on it. And we're still doing the Lyco method, so we're still doing light attack, bar swap right into Endless Hail. And then we're just using Action Duration Miner to keep track of Hurricane. We do want it to run completely out before we recast it, because the last couple of ticks hit the hardest for Hurricane. Now Dark Deal ran out, so we're going to cast it again. And then just keep using our spamble that way. That's basically the rotation. It's going to be a little bit dynamic just because of the way Hurricane ends up working out. You can see here, Hurricane will run out while we're on our back bar, and that's okay. You can have a little bit of downtime on Hurricane. So you can see Hurricane ran out, and that's fine, like I said. And that's basically the entire rotation here. So depending on how you want to do your ultimate. So the Storm Atronach has a pretty long animation itself. So if you want, you can bar swap cancel out that animation instead of doing something like Storm Atronach Poison Injection. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. I typically just use Storm Atronach Poison Injection and then bar swap, but again, you can reverse that order if you would like. Alright, so now that we've kind of gone over our rotation a little bit, we'll just go over it in a 6 million dummy parse, a full 6 million dummy parse. You guys can see it in action. This also will give you a sense of where Stamsorks stand in comparison to other stamina DPS that I've tested on this channel. So one thing to keep in mind if you are going to be comparing, you know, max parses and things like that, is that Stamsorks do not have an innate source of Major Fracture or Minor Berserk. So you will need to adjust accordingly in order to kind of get an accurate comparison between DPS. So for example, Nightblades and Wardens, they can have Major Fracture and Minor Berserk. So if you want to compare parses compared to those two, you will need to add in that Major Fracture DPS boost as well as the Minor Berserk DPS boost. Generally speaking, adding in Major Fracture will add in between 6-ish DPS, and Minor Berserk will add in about 8-ish. So you can add basically 14% DPS or so to your ultimate parse to kind of see where you stand compared to a Stamina Nightblade. These parses are not transferable between magic DPS, so you must compare this parse to Stamina DPS, no magic DPS, just because of the way buffs work. Stamina DPS and magic DPS have different modifiers to their weapon / spell damage. So let's go ahead and get started with the 6 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the rotation. So if Hurricane and Dark Deal are down, I prefer to put Hurricane up first and have a little bit of downtime on Dark Deal. It's perfectly fine to have a little bit of downtime on Dark Deal here. And again, we do want to have Hurricane run almost completely out before we re-up it. In this case, I am going to actually re-up Hurricane before going to my back bar here. You can see here that we will end up running out of Hurricane in the middle of a back bar rotation, and again, that's fine. So again, I like to have Hurricane up before I do my Dark Deal cast. Again, I like to do Storm Atro Poison Injection, but you can do Poison Injection Storm Atro, and I'll try to do that next time Storm Atro is up. And you'll notice that our health did go up while Storm Atro is up, so now we're at 17.4k health. That's what I was talking about with using Storm Atro gives you a little bit more health while it's up. So again, it looks like our Endless Hail is going to run out. Or Hurricane's going to run out while we're on our back bar. And again, that's perfectly fine. It does look like we will be able to get one more Storm Atro. So I can show you guys what it looks like when you animation cancel out of the Atro. In this case, you do Poison Injection. Oh, okay, Storm Atro decided not to cast there. So this parse is going to end up being a little bit lower just because we don't have our Atro out. That's fine. Alright, so that's pretty much it for our 6-man dummy parse. So again, you do want to keep in mind we don't have Major Fracture, we don't have Minor Berserk, so I'll try to mentally add that in while we go over our combat metrics parse here. So Veiled Heritance, pretty good uptime. You will have a little bit lower uptime just because we have spend a little bit more time on our back bars as sword compared to some other classes. So 86% is pretty much on the money in terms of where it normally sits for me. It's usually between 85 to 90% compared to like 90 to 95 on other classes. Again, because we have 4 to 5 global cooldowns on our back bar compared to most classes have 3 to 4 instead. So that's pretty much it here. Like I mentioned in the beginning when we were going over gear and enchants, Berserker, very high uptime, almost 100% uptime here. Now if we take a look at Implosion, the proc here, we only got 7 procs of Implosion for the, I believe this is a physical weapon, and then we didn't get any electric, the shock damage Implosions. But you can see here we got 7, and it does hit pretty decently, but it doesn't contribute that much. It's just kind of a nice little bit of a boost for our during our execute phase here. So Hurricane, like I said, the largest hits do happen on the last couple of ticks of Hurricane, but because it doesn't do as much damage as other dots, so especially Endless Hail, Laser Caltrops, things like that, we don't need to maintain 100% uptime on Hurricane here if we don't need to. It does give us Major Ward, Major Resolve, yes, but it's not absolutely necessary to keep up Hurricane all that much. So Absorb Stam is really nice to have now on a Stam DPS. It does provide about 170 to 180 additional regen here, so that just helps out a regen by a really good margin. Then Dark Deal here, this is including that additional burst, so like I said, 2400 over 20 seconds is 120, but if we add in that additional burst that we get from the casting it, we do get a little bit more than 120 in terms of raw regen power here. So that is pretty much everything here, all this stuff. So that's pretty much it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about the build itself, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.